My appendix burst at 3 in the morning. The pain was so agonizing I could not even stand. I called my parents 17 times. On the 18th try, my mother finally texted back. She wrote, "Tomorrow is your sister Chloe's baby shower. The Preston family is flying in from Boston. We cannot leave now. Call an Uber." I dragged myself to the emergency room and flatlined on the operating table for 2 full minutes. When I woke up, the surgeon looked at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. He said, "Maya, a woman claiming to be your mother, is in the lobby demanding we discharge you immediately to avoid paying your hospital bill. But you do not need to worry, because the man who just paid your $150,000 invoice left a message that sent your parents running." Before I tell you who that man was, and how I destroyed my family's fake high society empire, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever been the scapegoat in your own family. The pain woke me up long before my alarm ever could. It was a sharp, vicious stabbing sensation in my lower right abdomen that completely took my breath away. My name is Maya. I am 30 years old and I run a crisis public relations agency here in Atlanta. I spend my days managing massive corporate disasters for high-profile clients. But lying on my cold bathroom floor, clutching my stomach, I was facing a terrifying crisis I could not spin. I reached for my phone with shaking hands. The screen blurred as I desperately dialed my parents' house. My father Marcus and my mother Vivian are completely obsessed with status. They belong to all the right social clubs, attend the most exclusive galas, and bend over backward to impress anyone with old money. They were especially obsessed with my 28-year-old sister Chloe and her husband Preston. Chloe was a former pageant queen at Spelman College, and Preston comes from a wealthy white family in Boston with a trust fund that my parents treat like absolute royalty. They worship the ground Preston walks on simply because of his last name and his skin color, hoping his family's generational wealth will elevate their own social standing. I called my parents' landline. No answer. I called my mother's cell phone. No answer. I called my father's phone. Still nothing. I dialed 17 times. Every single ring echoed in the silent bathroom, while cold sweat poured down my face and my vision began to tunnel. Finally, on the 18th attempt, a text message popped up from my mother. It did not ask if I was okay. It did not ask why I was calling repeatedly in the middle of the night. It read exactly this: "Stop calling us Maya. Tomorrow is Chloe's baby shower at the country club. The Preston family is flying in from Boston and we are hosting them. We cannot leave our guests or ruin our sleep for whatever drama you are creating right now. Call an Uber." I stared at the glowing screen as tears blurred my vision. The betrayal hit me far harder than the physical agony. My own mother was prioritizing her rich white son-in-law and a country club baby shower over her eldest daughter crying out for help. I was just a self-made business owner, in their eyes a working-class girl who did not marry into wealth and therefore had no real value. I dragged my heavy body across the cold tile floor. Every movement felt like broken glass twisting inside my stomach. I managed to unlock my front door and crawl into the hallway of my building. Thankfully, a neighbor returning from a late shift found me curled up near the elevator and immediately called an ambulance. The ride to the hospital was a chaotic blur of flashing red lights and piercing sirens. By the time they wheeled me through the emergency room doors, my vision was fading entirely to black. The triage nurse took one look at my pale face and my rigid stomach and started shouting urgent orders. I remember the frantic rush down the brightly lit corridors, the rapid cutting of my clothes, and the sudden freezing air against my skin. The surgeon leaned over me and explained that my appendix had ruptured. Sepsis was setting in quickly. My organs were beginning to shut down. As the heavy anesthesia flowed into my veins, my last conscious thought was the bitter, heartbreaking realization that if I died tonight, my parents would probably complain about how my funeral ruined their weekend social calendar. I flatlined on the operating table. For 2 entire minutes, my heart stopped beating. The medical team had to use a defibrillator to shock me back to life. During those 2 minutes of darkness, I did not see a bright, comforting light. I did not see my life flash before my eyes in a beautiful montage. All I felt was a profound, overwhelming silence, a heavy silence that perfectly mirrored the lifelong emotional absence of my family. I had spent my entire life trying to earn their love by being incredibly responsible, by building my own successful company from the ground up, by taking care of myself so they would never have to worry. And my reward was dying alone while they worried about catering menus and expensive floral arrangements for a family that secretly looked down on them. I woke up hours later in the intensive care unit. The rhythmic, slow beeping of the heart monitor was the very first sound that registered in my foggy brain. Then the sharp, clinical smell of strong antiseptic filled my lungs. I tried to shift my weight, but an intense burning pain anchored me firmly to the hospital bed. Tubes and medical wires extended from my arms and chest. The heavy wooden door opened, and the lead surgeon walked in holding a silver clipboard. He looked incredibly exhausted, but visibly relieved to see my eyes open. He checked my vitals carefully and shined a small, bright light into my pupils. "You are very lucky to be alive, Maya," he said softly. "Your appendix burst completely, and the toxic infection had spread rapidly throughout your abdominal cavity. We actually lost you for 2 minutes during the procedure." I stared up at the sterile ceiling, letting the heavy reality of my near-death experience sink into my bones. I wanted to ask for some water, but my throat was entirely too dry to speak. Before I could force a word out, the surgeon pulled up a chair beside my bed. His professional expression shifted from clinical relief to deep personal concern. He leaned in and lowered his voice. "Maya, I need to tell you exactly what is happening outside this room right now. There is a woman in the waiting area who claims to be your mother, Vivian. She arrived about 20 minutes ago." I felt a tiny, fragile spark of hope ignite in my chest. Maybe they had realized their horrible mistake. Maybe they had felt a sudden pang of guilt and rushed to the hospital after all to make sure their daughter survived. But that tiny spark was instantly and brutally extinguished by the doctor's next words. He took a deep breath and continued. "She is absolutely not here to see how you are doing. She has been screaming at the nursing staff demanding that we process your discharge paperwork immediately. I explained to her that you just survived a massive lethal infection and that leaving this bed right now could easily cause a fatal relapse. Do you know what she said to me? She said she absolutely refuses to sign any financial responsibility forms for your intensive care treatment and that you need to get up and leave immediately because she will not let your hospital debt ruin her perfect credit score. She is literally trying to force you out of a hospital bed while you are recovering from life support, just so she does not have to pay a single dime." The monitors beside me began to beep faster and faster as my heart rate spiked with pure, unadulterated rage. My own mother wanted to throw me out onto the street with fresh surgical wounds, just to protect her precious bank account. The doctor placed a gentle, calming hand on my shoulder. "But you do not need to worry about her, Maya," he said with a sudden, sharp smile, "because someone else stepped in. A man arrived shortly after your mother started her selfish tantrum. He walked straight up to the billing department and handed them a solid black card. He paid your entire $150,000 medical bill in full without blinking an eye. And then he walked over to your mother and whispered something in her ear that made her turn pale and literally run out of the emergency room doors in a complete panic." I stared at the doctor in complete, absolute shock. My tired mind raced frantically, trying to think of anyone in my life who would do such an incredibly generous thing. Who was it? I managed to whisper through my dry, cracked lips. The doctor smiled warmly and handed me a thick, cream-colored envelope that had been resting quietly under his clipboard. He told me to get some rest and stepped out of the room, closing the door gently behind him. I slowly peeled open the heavy envelope with my trembling fingers, bracing myself for whatever truth lay inside. Just as my trembling fingers brushed against the heavy cream-colored paper of the envelope, the heavy wooden door to my intensive care room was shoved violently inward. The door hit the wall with a sharp, deafening crack that made my fresh surgical wounds throb. My mother, Vivian, marched into the sterile room looking like she had just stepped off the cover of a luxury lifestyle magazine. She wore a pristine, tailored emerald green suit accented with a perfectly draped silk scarf. Her hair was immaculately styled, and her diamond earrings caught the harsh, fluorescent hospital lights. My father, Marcus, trailed closely behind her, frantically checking his heavy gold Rolex watch with deep irritation. And right behind them, stepping into my room with an arrogant, familiar smirk, was Preston. Preston is my sister Chloe's husband. He is a 32-year-old hedge fund manager from a long, unbroken line of Boston old money. He wore a casual cashmere sweater draped effortlessly over his shoulders, looking utterly bored by the inconvenience of my near-death experience. My parents worshipped the ground Preston walked on simply because of his skin color and his family's generational wealth. They believed tying our family to his white high society lineage would finally secure their ultimate validation in the Atlanta elite scene. Vivian did not rush to my bedside. She did not ask how I was feeling or even glance at the terrifying medical machines keeping me alive. Instead, she pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at my face and snapped. "Maya, what on earth is wrong with you? Do you have any idea what time it is?" The Preston family patriarch just landed his private jet at the airfield, and we are supposed to be hosting their welcome brunch at the country club in exactly 1 hour. You deliberately waited until the most important weekend of your sister's life to pull a stunt like this. Looking at her pointing finger, my mind violently snapped back to a freezing Tuesday morning 12 years ago. I was 18 years old, burning up with a 102-degree fever and barely able to stand in our kitchen. I had begged my mother to let me call in sick to my double shift at the local diner. Vivian had grabbed my greasy uniform shirt, shoved it against my aching chest, and told me to swallow some pills and get out the door. She said Chloe needed a custom-beaded gown for her Spelman College pageant, and my diner paycheck was the only way to cover the rush delivery fee. My fever, my pain, and my literal health meant absolutely nothing compared to the visual perfection of her golden child. 12 years had passed and absolutely nothing had changed. I was still just an inconvenient obstacle to her endless social climbing. My father Marcus finally looked up from his luxury watch. His face was twisted with pure corporate annoyance. "Maya," he said using his sharpest executive tone, "your mother has been dealing with the billing department for 20 minutes. They are quoting us an astronomical figure for this intensive care suite. You know very well we just maxed out our credit lines to secure the VIP pavilion for Chloe's baby shower today. You need to sign a waiver absolving us of all financial responsibility right now, and then you need to get dressed. We are not paying for you to lounge around here pretending to be sick while we have elite guests waiting on us." Before I could even force my dry throat to form the words to defend myself, Preston stepped forward. He bypassed my parents entirely easily, asserting his dominant role in the hierarchy they so desperately worshipped. He reached into his designer leather wallet and pulled out 5 crisp $100 bills. He did not hand them to me. He tossed them casually onto my thin hospital blanket like he was tipping a valet driver. "Listen," Maya, Preston said, his voice dripping with that quiet, condescending authority reserved for generationally wealthy men. "Do not be a burden to my in-laws today. They have worked very hard to prove they belong in our social circle, and this whole medical emergency routine is incredibly tacky. Take this cash. Pay for your little Uber ride back to whatever apartment you live in and take care of yourself. We have a 4-course catering menu waiting, and frankly, your drama is killing the mood." My heart monitor began to beep wildly. The machine screamed out the intense, furious rage that my body was too weak to articulate. My own parents were standing right there, actively watching a privileged white man throw money at their critically ill black daughter like she was a beggar on the street. And they said absolutely nothing. In fact, my mother looked relieved that Preston had handled the dirty work for her so she would not have to open her own purse. The rapid blaring of my heart monitor summoned immediate backup. The lead surgeon stormed back into the room, flanked by 2 massive hospital security guards. The doctor's face was flushed with pure professional outrage. He stepped directly between my hospital bed and Preston, using his own body as a physical shield to protect me. "I told you to wait in the lobby," the surgeon barked at my mother, his voice echoing sharply off the tile walls. "This patient is recovering from a massive septic rupture. Your presence is causing acute medical distress. I want all 3 of you out of this room right now before I have security physically drag you out of my hospital." My father puffed out his chest, trying desperately to salvage his fragile pride in front of his wealthy son-in-law. "You cannot speak to us like that. We are her family." The surgeon did not back down a single inch. Family does not try to force a septic patient onto the street to save a few bucks. He fired back coldly. "Get out. Now." Preston rolled his eyes and shook his head, as if the entire medical staff was entirely beneath his notice. "Come on, Vivian," he said, turning his back to me without a second glance. "Let us leave. We have a country club waiting and I am parched." My mother and father instantly fell into step behind him, practically tripping over themselves to follow his lead out the heavy wooden doors. They did not look back at me once. Once the door clicked shut, the surgeon let out a heavy, exhausted sigh and signaled the security guards to wait outside in the hallway. He turned back to my bed and picked up the $500 Preston had thrown on my blanket. He placed the bills on my bedside table with a look of utter disgust for the people who had just left. Then he looked down at the thick cream-colored envelope still resting in my trembling hands. "Let me help you with that, Maya," the surgeon said, his voice softening considerably. He gently took the envelope, opened it, and slid out a heavy piece of custom stationery embossed with a striking gold crest. "I told you that you do not need to worry about them," he continued, "because, like I mentioned, the man who paid your $150,000 bill in full left this specific message for you." The surgeon held up the note and read it aloud in the quiet room. It said, "Maya, rest up and heal. I have settled the invoice. Do not worry about the baby shower today. I have already sent a special gift to the country club that will give your family the exact kind of attention they desperately crave." It was signed Elijah Sterling. I stared at the name as a massive wave of realization crashed over me. Elijah Sterling, the self-made black billionaire and real estate mogul, the man whose entire corporate empire I had saved from a brutal media crisis just last year. He was not just a former client. He was the only person who treated me like the brilliant daughter he never had. Knowing Elijah and his protective, ruthless nature, his idea of a special gift at a high society gathering was going to be an absolute bloodbath. Despite the fresh surgical stitches pulling tightly across my abdomen, I could not hold it in anymore. Lying there in the intensive care unit surrounded by beeping machines and the scent of iodine, I threw my head back and laughed. My appendix burst at 3 in the morning. I was curled on my bathroom floor, dialing my parents for the 17th time as my vision went black. On the 18th try, my mother Vivian finally texted back. She did not ask if I was okay. She wrote, "Your sister Chloe has her baby shower tomorrow. The Preston family is flying in from Boston. We cannot leave now. Call an Uber." I dragged myself to the emergency room, and my heart stopped on the operating table for 2 full minutes. When I finally woke up, the surgeon looked at me with pure disgust. He told me a woman claiming to be my mother was in the lobby demanding they discharge me immediately to avoid paying my medical bill. But he also told me I did not have to worry. A total stranger had just paid my entire $150,000 invoice in full and left a message that sent my parents running for the exit. Before I tell you who that man was and how I systematically dismantled my family's fake high society empire, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever been the scapegoat in your own family. The pain had woken me up long before my alarm ever could. It was a sharp, vicious stabbing sensation in my lower right abdomen that completely stole my breath. My name is Maya. I am 30 years old and I run a crisis public relations agency in Atlanta. I spend my days managing massive corporate disasters for high-profile clients. But lying on my cold bathroom floor clutching my stomach, I was facing a terrifying crisis I could not spin. I reached for my phone with shaking hands. The screen blurred as I desperately dialed my parents' house. My father Marcus and my mother Vivian are completely obsessed with status. They belong to all the right social clubs, attend the most exclusive galas, and bend over backward to impress anyone with old money. They were especially obsessed with my 28-year-old sister Chloe and her husband Preston. Chloe was a former pageant queen at Spelman College, and Preston comes from a wealthy white family in Boston with a trust fund that my parents treat like absolute royalty. They worship the ground Preston walks on simply because of his last name and his skin color, hoping his family's generational wealth will elevate their own standing in the Atlanta elite scene. I called my parents' landline. No answer. I called my mother's cell phone. No answer. I called my father's phone. Still nothing. I dialed 17 times. Every single ring echoed in the silent bathroom while cold sweat poured down my face and my vision began to tunnel. I could not breathe. I could not stand. Finally, on the 18th attempt, a text message popped up from my mother. It did not ask if I was okay. It did not ask why I was calling repeatedly in the middle of the night. It read exactly this: "Stop calling us Maya. Tomorrow is Chloe's baby shower at the country club. The Preston family is flying in from Boston and we are hosting them. We cannot leave our guests or ruin our sleep for whatever drama you are creating right now. Call an Uber." I stared at the glowing screen as tears blurred my vision. The betrayal hit me far harder than the physical agony. My own mother was prioritizing her rich white son-in-law and a country club baby shower over her eldest daughter crying out for help. I was just a self-made business owner in their eyes, a working-class girl who did not marry into wealth and therefore had no real value. This was not the first time my mother had chosen a party over my health. I remembered being 18 years old, shivering with a terrible fever. My mother had forced me to go to my shift at the local diner anyway because she needed my paycheck to buy a designer gown for Chloe's homecoming dance. My pain was always an inconvenience to her social climbing. I dragged my heavy body across the cold tile floor. Every movement felt like broken glass twisting inside my stomach. I managed to unlock my front door and crawl into the hallway of my building. I knew if I waited for an Uber, I would die in my apartment. Thankfully, a neighbor returning from a late shift found me curled up near the elevator and immediately called an ambulance. The ride to the hospital was a chaotic blur of flashing red lights and piercing sirens. By the time they wheeled me through the emergency room doors, my vision was fading entirely to black. The triage nurse took one look at my pale face and my rigid stomach and started shouting urgent orders. I remember the frantic rush down the brightly lit corridors, the rapid cutting of my clothes, and the sudden freezing air against my skin. The surgeon leaned over me and explained that my appendix had ruptured. Sepsis was setting in quickly, my organs were beginning to shut down. As the heavy anesthesia flowed into my veins, my last conscious thought was the bitter, heartbreaking realization that if I died tonight, my parents would probably complain about how my funeral ruined their weekend social calendar. I flatlined on the operating table. For 2 entire minutes, my heart stopped beating. The medical team had to use a defibrillator to shock me back to life. During those 2 minutes of darkness, I did not see a bright, comforting light. I did not see my life flash before my eyes in a beautiful montage. All I felt was a profound, overwhelming silence, a heavy silence that perfectly mirrored the lifelong emotional absence of my family. I had spent my entire life trying to earn their love by being incredibly responsible, by building my own successful company from the ground up, by taking care of myself so they would never have to worry. And my reward was dying alone while they worried about catering menus and expensive floral arrangements for a family that secretly looked down on them. I woke up hours later in the intensive care unit. The rhythmic, slow beeping of the heart monitor was the very first sound that registered in my foggy brain. Then the sharp, clinical smell of strong antiseptic filled my lungs. I tried to shift my weight, but an intense, burning pain anchored me firmly to the hospital bed. Tubes and medical wires extended from my arms and chest. The heavy wooden door opened and the lead surgeon walked in holding a silver clipboard. He looked incredibly exhausted, but visibly angry. Not at me, but at something happening outside my room. He checked my vitals carefully and shined a small bright light into my pupils. "You are very lucky to be alive, Maya," he said softly. "Your appendix burst completely, and the toxic infection had spread rapidly throughout your abdominal cavity. We actually lost you for 2 minutes during the procedure." I stared up at the sterile ceiling, letting the heavy reality of my near-death experience sink into my bones. I wanted to ask for some water, but my throat was entirely too dry to speak. Before I could force a word out, the surgeon pulled up a chair beside my bed. His professional expression shifted from clinical relief to deep personal disgust. He leaned in and lowered his voice. "Maya, I need to tell you exactly what is happening outside this room right now. There is a woman in the waiting area who claims to be your mother, Vivian. She arrived about 20 minutes ago." I felt a tiny, fragile spark of hope ignite in my chest. Maybe they had realized their horrible mistake. Maybe they had felt a sudden pang of guilt and rushed to the hospital after all to make sure their daughter survived. But that tiny spark was instantly and brutally extinguished by the doctor's next words. He took a deep breath and continued. She is absolutely not here to see how you are doing. She has been screaming at the nursing staff demanding that we process your discharge paperwork immediately. I explained to her that you just survived a massive lethal infection and that leaving this bed right now could easily cause a fatal relapse. Do you know what she said to me? She said she absolutely refuses to sign any financial responsibility forms for your intensive care treatment. She told me that you need to get up and leave immediately because she will not let your hospital debt ruin her perfect credit score or delay her country club schedule. She is literally trying to force you out of a hospital bed while you are recovering from life support just so she does not have to pay a single dime. Just as my trembling fingers brushed against the heavy cream-colored paper of the envelope, the heavy wooden door to my intensive care room was shoved violently inward. The door hit the wall with a sharp, deafening crack that made my fresh surgical wounds throb. My mother Vivian marched into the sterile room looking like she had just stepped off the cover of a luxury lifestyle magazine. She wore a pristine, tailored emerald green suit accented with a perfectly draped silk scarf. Her hair was immaculately styled, and her diamond earrings caught the harsh fluorescent hospital lights. My father Marcus trailed closely behind her, frantically checking his heavy gold watch with deep irritation. And right behind them, stepping into my room with an arrogant, familiar smirk, was Preston. Preston is my sister Chloe's husband. He is a 32-year-old hedge fund manager from a long, unbroken line of Boston old money. He wore a casual cashmere sweater draped effortlessly over his shoulders, looking utterly bored by the inconvenience of my near-death experience. My parents worshipped the ground Preston walked on simply because of his skin color and his family's generational wealth. They believed tying our family to his white, high society lineage would finally secure their ultimate validation in the Atlanta elite scene. Vivian did not rush to my bedside. She did not ask how I was feeling or even glance at the terrifying medical machines keeping me alive. Instead, she pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at my face and snapped. "Maya, what on earth is wrong with you? Do you have any idea what time it is?" The Preston family patriarch just landed his private jet at the airfield, and we are supposed to be hosting their welcome brunch at the country club in exactly 1 hour. You deliberately waited until the most important weekend of your sister's life to pull a stunt like this. Looking at her pointing finger, my mind violently snapped back to a freezing Tuesday morning 12 years ago. I was 18 years old, burning up with a 102-degree fever and barely able to stand in our kitchen. I had begged my mother to let me call in sick to my double shift at the local diner. Vivian had grabbed my greasy uniform shirt, shoved it against my aching chest, and told me to swallow some pills and get out the door. She said Chloe needed a custom beaded gown for her Spelman College pageant, and my diner paycheck was the only way to cover the rush delivery fee. My fever, my pain, and my literal health meant absolutely nothing compared to the visual perfection of her golden child. 12 years had passed, and absolutely nothing had changed. I was still just an inconvenient obstacle to her endless social climbing. My father, Marcus, finally looked up from his luxury watch. His face was twisted with pure corporate annoyance. "Maya," he said, using his sharpest executive tone, "your mother has been dealing with the billing department for 20 minutes. They are quoting us an astronomical figure for this intensive care suite. You know very well we just maxed out our credit lines to secure the VIP pavilion for Chloe's baby shower today. You need to sign a waiver absolving us of all financial responsibility right now, and then you need to get dressed. We are not paying for you to lounge around here pretending to be sick while we have elite guests waiting on us." Before I could even force my dry throat to form the words to defend myself, Preston stepped forward. He bypassed my parents entirely easily, asserting his dominant role in the hierarchy they so desperately worshipped. He reached into his designer leather wallet and pulled out 5 crisp $100 bills. He did not hand them to me. He tossed them casually onto my thin hospital blanket like he was tipping a valet driver. "Listen, Maya," Preston said, his voice dripping with that quiet, condescending authority reserved for generationally wealthy men. "Do not be a burden to my in-laws today. They have worked very hard to prove they belong in our social circle, and this whole medical emergency routine is incredibly tacky. Take this cash. Pay for your little Uber ride back to whatever apartment you live in, and take care of yourself. We have a 4-course catering menu waiting, and frankly, your drama is killing the mood. My heart monitor began to beep wildly. The machine screamed out the intense, furious rage that my body was too weak to articulate. My own parents were standing right there actively watching a privileged white man throw money at their critically ill black daughter like she was a beggar on the street. And they said absolutely nothing. In fact, my mother looked relieved that Preston had handled the dirty work for her, so she would not have to open her own purse. The rapid blaring of my heart monitor summoned immediate backup. The lead surgeon stormed back into the room, flanked by 2 massive hospital security guards. The doctor's face was flushed with pure professional outrage. He stepped directly between my hospital bed and Preston, using his own body as a physical shield to protect me. "I told you to wait in the lobby," the surgeon barked at my mother, his voice echoing sharply off the tile walls. "This patient is recovering from a massive septic rupture. Your presence is causing acute medical distress. I want all 3 of you out of this room right now, before I have security physically drag you out of my hospital." My father puffed out his chest, trying desperately to salvage his fragile pride in front of his wealthy son-in-law. "You cannot speak to us like that. We are her family." The surgeon did not back down a single inch. "Family does not try to force a septic patient onto the street to save a few bucks," he fired back coldly. "Get out. Now." Preston rolled his eyes and shook his head as if the entire medical staff was entirely beneath his notice. "Come on, Vivian," he said, turning his back to me without a second glance. "Let us leave. We have a country club waiting, and I am parched." My mother and father instantly fell into step behind him, practically tripping over themselves to follow his lead out the heavy wooden doors. They did not look back at me once. Once the door clicked shut, the surgeon let out a heavy, exhausted sigh and signaled the security guards to wait outside in the hallway. He turned back to my bed and picked up the $500 Preston had thrown on my blanket. He placed the bills on my bedside table with a look of utter disgust for the people who had just left. Then he looked down at the thick cream-colored envelope still resting in my trembling hands. "Let me help you with that, Maya," the surgeon said, his voice softening considerably. He gently took the envelope, opened it, and slid out a heavy piece of custom stationery embossed with a striking gold crest. "I told you that you do not need to worry about them," he continued, "because, like I mentioned, the man who paid your $150,000 bill in full left this specific message for you." The surgeon held up the note and read it aloud in the quiet room. It said, "Maya, rest up and heal. I have settled the invoice. Do not worry about the baby shower today. I have already sent a special gift to the country club that will give your family the exact kind of attention they desperately crave." It was signed, Elijah Sterling. I stared at the name as a massive wave of realization crashed over me. Elijah Sterling, the self-made black billionaire and real estate mogul, the man whose entire corporate empire I had saved from a brutal media crisis just last year. He was not just a former client. He was the only person who treated me like the brilliant daughter he never had. Knowing Elijah and his protective, ruthless nature, his idea of a special gift at a high society gathering was going to be an absolute nightmare for my status-obsessed parents. But as much as I appreciated his intervention, a sudden burning realization washed over me. I could not just lie here. I could not let my parents and Preston stand in a ballroom, sipping expensive champagne, playing the role of the perfect wealthy family, while the daughter they literally left to die was tucked away out of sight. I needed to look them in the eyes. I needed them to see that they did not break me. Before I could even attempt to sit up, the heavy door to my room opened again. 2 massive men wearing impeccably tailored dark suits stepped inside. They moved with a quiet military precision, immediately securing the perimeter of my hospital room. A third man walked in behind them carrying a black leather medical bag. He introduced himself as Dr. Hayes, the private concierge physician for the Sterling family. He explained that Mr. Sterling had dispatched his personal security and medical team the moment he learned about my emergency. Mr. Sterling wants you transferred to his private recovery estate immediately, Dr. Hayes said while checking the monitors beside my bed. We have an advanced transport unit waiting downstairs. You will have round-the-clock care until your surgical wounds are completely healed. I looked at the doctor and then down at my own trembling hands. The pain radiating from my abdomen was blinding, but the fire burning in my chest was so much stronger. I am not going to a recovery estate, I said, my voice raspy but resolute. I am going to the country club. Dr. Hayes froze and stared at me like I had completely lost my mind. Maya, you flatlined hours ago. You just had major abdominal surgery for a ruptured appendix. Your body has endured massive trauma. If you try to stand up right now, you could tear your stitches or trigger a dangerous drop in your blood pressure. You need rest. I need to finish this, I fired back. My parents just tried to throw me onto the street because my near-death experience was inconvenient for their social calendar. My sister is currently accepting gifts from the same white elite family that looks down on our entire culture. I am not hiding in a quiet room while they celebrate my absence. I look directly into the doctor's eyes. I know you have high-grade pain management in that bag. Give me a safe injection that will keep me on my feet for exactly 2 hours. That is all the time I need. Dr. Hayes opened his mouth to argue, but the lead security guard gently placed a hand on his shoulder. You know how Mr. Sterling operates, Doc, the guard said with a faint smirk. She has the exact same stubborn blood in her veins. You are not going to talk her out of this. Just patch her up, and we will keep her safe. The doctor let out a heavy, defeated sigh but nodded. He opened his leather bag and prepared a specialized injection. He warned me that it would mask the pain temporarily, but the moment it wore off, I would feel every single consequence of my actions. I did not care. As the cool medication flooded my system, the agonizing burning in my stomach began to dull into a manageable throbbing ache. I turned to the security guard. I need clothes, I told him. I cannot crash a high society baby shower in a hospital gown. I need my assistant to bring my black suit from my office closet. The guard tapped his earpiece and relayed the message instantly. Within 45 minutes, my personal assistant arrived breathless and holding a pristine garment bag. Getting dressed was an absolute battle of willpower. Every movement pulled at my fresh stitches, but the medication kept the worst of the agony at bay. I slipped into my tailored charcoal blazer and matching wide-leg trousers. The sharp, structured lines of the suit felt like heavy armor sliding over my vulnerable, battered body. I applied a bold red lipstick to hide the pale, sickly color of my face. When I looked in the hospital mirror, I did not see a victim who had nearly died on an operating table just hours prior. I saw a woman ready to burn down a kingdom of lies. The security detail escorted me down the private elevator and out the back entrance of the hospital. A sleek, armored black SUV was waiting by the curb with the engine quietly purring. The drive to the country club took exactly 20 minutes. It was 20 minutes of perfectly silent, focused anticipation. I watched the sprawling mansions of Buckhead roll past the tinted windows. I thought about how many years my parents had sacrificed their own dignity just to be invited into these exclusive zip codes. They had traded their morals, their culture, and eventually their own flesh and blood just to secure a seat at a table that was never built for them. The SUV pulled up to the grand entrance of the Atlanta Country Club. It was a massive, imposing structure of white columns and perfectly manicured hedges, designed specifically to keep certain people out while elevating those lucky enough to be allowed inside. The valet rushed forward to open my door, but Elijah's security guard beat him to it. I stepped out of the vehicle and the midday Georgia heat hit my face. My abdomen throbbed fiercely, a sharp reminder of the surgical staples holding my body together, but I forced my posture to remain entirely perfectly straight. I walked up the wide marble steps with deliberate, measured purpose. My two massive security guards flanked me, like shadow figures projecting an aura of untouchable authority. The country club staff standing by the grand entrance took one look at my sharp suit and the heavy security detail and immediately stepped aside without asking a single question. I stood right outside the heavy double oak doors of the main ballroom. From the other side of the thick wood, I could hear the faint sound of clinking champagne glasses and the loud melodic laughter of wealthy people completely oblivious to the real world. I could hear my mother Vivian raising her voice in a cheerful toast, probably praising the Preston family for their incredible generosity. I adjusted my blazer one final time. I took a slow, deep breath, ignoring the sharp sting of pain in my side. I raised my foot, and the sharp click of my designer heel echoed loudly against the polished marble floor. I reached out and grabbed the heavy brass handle. They wanted to pretend I did not exist. They wanted to celebrate their perfect fake reality while I faded into nothing. But they were about to learn that you cannot bury someone who refuses to die. I pushed the heavy oak doors wide open and stepped straight into the light. The grand ballroom of the Atlanta Country Club was a dizzying, suffocating whirlwind of crystal chandeliers, clinking champagne flutes, and absolute pretension. The air was thick with the heavy scent of expensive floral arrangements and roasted duck. The entire space had been transformed into a lavish pastel wonderland, dedicated to celebrating a baby that had not even arrived yet. I stood perfectly still at the entrance, letting my eyes adjust to the bright lights and taking in the sickening scene before me. The room was divided by a stark and visible line of social hierarchy. Preston's family occupied the center tables like reigning monarchs holding court over their eager subjects. His parents and their wealthy white friends sat with perfectly straight posture, sipping imported wine and loudly boasting about their Mayflower ancestry and their summer estates in Martha's Vineyard. My parents, Marcus and Vivian, hovered around them like desperate, eager servants. They were practically vibrating with the need for validation, nodding along to every single word the Prestons said and laughing far too loudly at jokes that were not even remotely funny. I watched my father, a man who usually demanded absolute respect from everyone in his community, shrink himself down to agree with Preston's father about the local real estate market. I watched my mother pour champagne for Preston's mother, acting more like hired help than the grandmother of the baby they were celebrating. They were willing to trade their dignity, their culture, and their own flesh and blood just to absorb a tiny fraction of that old money prestige. The heavy oak doors slamming against the walls had cut through the upbeat jazz music like a gunshot. The live string quartet in the corner missed a note and stumbled to a halting, clumsy stop. Every head in the massive ballroom turned toward the entrance. I stood there framed by the grand doorway, flanked by my two towering security guards. My tailored charcoal blazer hung sharply over my shoulders, hiding the fresh surgical staples holding my abdomen together. My face was pale from the severe blood loss, but my red lipstick was flawless and my posture was completely unbroken. The silence that fell over the room was absolute and suffocating. You could hear a pin drop on the thick carpet. My mother dropped her crystal champagne flute. It shattered violently against the polished hardwood floor, spilling expensive bubbly all over her designer shoes. My father choked on his own breath, his eyes darting frantically between me and the Preston family patriarch. They were terrified. They were not terrified because I looked pale or because they thought I might be in medical distress. They were terrified because my presence was actively ruining their carefully curated illusion of the perfect, obedient family. I was the dark secret they had tried to lock away in a hospital room, and now I was standing right in front of their elite audience. Chloe was seated at the far end of the room on an absurdly large wicker throne surrounded by towering piles of pastel-wrapped gifts. She wore a tight silk maternity dress and a literal fake diamond tiara resting on her perfectly curled hair. Instead of looking at me and asking if her sister had survived the surgery, she instantly shifted into her favorite role, the victim. Chloe burst into loud theatrical tears that echoed across the quiet ballroom. She pointed a trembling manicured finger directly at me. "Why are you here, Maya?" Chloe shrieked, her voice pitching into a hysterical whine. "You could not let me have just one day. You are so obsessed with ruining my life because you are jealous. You are just completely jealous that I married Preston and secured my future while you are going to die alone with your ridiculous little business. You could not stand the fact that the Prestons are hosting this beautiful party for me, so you had to fake some dramatic medical emergency just to steal my spotlight. Get out! Get out right now!" A collective gasp rippled through the wealthy guests. Preston's mother clutched her pearls, murmuring something highly offensive under her breath about the unhinged behavior of urban families and how they simply do not know how to conduct themselves in polite society. The casual racism wrapped in Southern hospitality made my stomach turn, but my parents did not even flinch. Preston just leaned back in his chair and smirked. His cold blue eyes locked onto mine, filled with arrogant amusement. He was entirely enjoying the spectacle of my black family tearing itself apart for his entertainment. He loved watching my parents humiliate themselves to protect his comfort. This was a game to him, and we were all just pieces on his board. Vivian realized she was rapidly losing the approval of her precious white in-laws. Her face contorted with pure, desperate rage. She stomped across the expansive ballroom floor, her heels clicking furiously against the wood. She did not see a daughter who had flatlined just hours ago. She saw a stubborn obstacle threatening her social climb. She marched right up to me, her chest heaving with anger. She raised her hand high into the air, fully intending to strike me across the face in front of hundreds of people just to prove her unwavering loyalty to the Preston family. "How dare you show your face here looking like a corpse and disrespecting your sister?" Vivian hissed, her voice shaking with venom. "You are going to apologize to the Prestons, and then you are going to leave before I have you thrown out." She brought her hand down fast, aiming directly for my cheek. I did not flinch. I did not blink. I did not even take a step back. I simply raised my right hand and snapped my fingers. The sharp crack of my fingers echoed loudly through the tense, heavy silence of the room. Vivian's hand stopped mere inches from my face. She gasped in shock because she had not stopped voluntarily. One of my massive security guards had stepped forward with lightning speed and effortlessly caught her wrist in a vice grip, stopping her assault instantly. He held her arm firmly in midair, his face completely blank and unbothered by her struggling. Vivian shrieked, demanding that Preston and Marcus do something about these thugs. She yelled that I was a disgrace and that I had no right to bring my cheap security into a place of such high society. But the real shock did not come from my security team. The real shock came from the back of the room. The general manager of the Atlanta Country Club, a notoriously strict older man who catered exclusively to old money and generational wealth, rushed forward through the crowd of stunned guests. My parents immediately expected him to call the police. They expected him to protect the wealthy Preston family and throw the disruptive black daughter out onto the street. Vivian even started shouting at the manager to call the authorities and have me arrested for trespassing on a private event. She wanted me dragged out in handcuffs just to save her own face. But the manager did not rush to protect the Prestons. He did not rush to comfort my mother or ask if Chloe was okay. He bypassed the wealthy white family entirely without even a sideways glance. He walked directly up to me, stopped inches away, and bowed deeply from the waist down in front of the entire silent ballroom. The general manager kept his head bowed low, demonstrating a level of profound respect that sent a physical shockwave through the entire ballroom. "Miss Maya," he said loudly enough for every single wealthy guest to hear. "It is an absolute privilege to have you on the premises today. We had no idea you would be visiting us. How may the club assist you right now?" My mother Vivian looked like she had just been struck across the face with a heavy brick. Her jaw actually dropped open and she stumbled backward, bumping awkwardly into Preston's father. My father Marcus turned a sickly pale shade of gray, his eyes darting frantically between me and the manager. Chloe completely forgot she was supposed to be playing the fragile crying victim. She sat frozen on her ridiculous wicker throne, staring at the manager in pure undisguised horror. The wealthy white guests from Boston began to murmur among themselves, their previously arrogant expressions shifting into deep confusion. Preston's mother, a woman who built her entire personality around exclusivity and class hierarchy, stepped forward with an angry scowl. "Vivian," she snapped, her tone dripping with sudden condescension. "What on earth is going on here? Why is the general manager of this country club bowing to your estranged daughter? I thought you said she was just a struggling hairstylist who ran some cheap little shop downtown." I did not let my mother answer. I held out my hand, and the manager immediately signaled an assistant, who rushed forward and placed a thick leather-bound financial portfolio directly into my palm. I flipped it open, taking my time, letting the unbearable, suffocating silence stretch across the massive ballroom. I looked right at my parents, watching them squirm under the crushing weight of their own lies. "You wanted to throw me out of a hospital bed to protect your credit score," I said, my voice carrying clearly and powerfully to every corner of the room. "You bragged to these people about your elite status. You acted like you were royalty. But did you happen to mention to your wealthy white-in-laws that you had to take out a second mortgage on your family home just to afford the basic initiation fee for this club?" A collective gasp echoed through the room. Preston's mother clutched her pearl necklace, taking a deliberate step away from my mother, as if poverty was a contagious disease. Marcus lunged forward, his face twisting with panic and rage. "Shut your mouth, you ungrateful girl," he barked, trying to use his booming voice to regain control. "You are lying. You are just trying to ruin your sister's perfect day because you are bitter and alone." I slowly closed the leather portfolio and handed it back to the manager. "You call my business a ridiculous little venture," I said, turning my gaze directly to Chloe, who was now shaking with actual fear. "You tell your in-laws that I am a struggling failure, but my public relations agency is the second largest shareholder of the Atlanta Country Club. I do not just have a membership here, Chloe. I literally own the floor you are standing on." The color drained completely from Chloe's face. The fake diamond tiara on her head suddenly looked incredibly cheap and pathetic. My parents stood entirely frozen, their carefully constructed high society illusion shattering into a million irreparable pieces in front of the very people they had sold their souls to impress. I turned back to the general manager, who was standing at attention waiting for my command. "Charles," I said, keeping my tone completely professional and icy cold, "this party is booked under my family name, which means it falls under my corporate umbrella. Downgrade this entire event immediately. Cancel the Platinum VIP package. Remove the imported champagne. Take away the 5-tier fondant cake. Drop their service level down to the absolute basic minimum allowed by health and safety regulations." "Yes, Miss Maya," Charles said without a single second of hesitation. He raised his hand and snapped his fingers. What happened next was the most beautiful, perfectly orchestrated symphony of humiliation I had ever witnessed. Dozens of country club staff members swarmed into the ballroom. They did not apologize. They did not ask for permission. They simply began dismantling the luxurious party right out from under my family. Waiters in crisp white shirts walked right up to the Preston family and literally took the crystal champagne flutes straight out of their hands. The guests watched in absolute stunned silence as the staff wheeled out massive metal carts and began loading up the expensive roasted duck, the caviar appetizers, and the towering floral centerpieces. A team of 4 workers marched up to Chloe's seating area and unceremoniously picked up the massive 5-tier custom fondant cake, wheeling it away back to the kitchen. Chloe shrieked and reached out for it, but the staff ignored her completely. Another group of waiters returned carrying cheap plastic pitchers filled with cloudy tap water. They slammed the pitchers down onto the tables along with stacks of flimsy, thin paper napkins and basic plastic cups. The luxurious string quartet packed up their expensive instruments and walked out the side door, leaving the ballroom in a dead, hollow silence. The outrage from Preston's family was instant and explosive. Preston's father threw his plastic cup onto the floor. "Marcus, what is the meaning of this absolute indignity?" he roared, his face turning bright red. "We flew all the way from Boston for a premium celebration, and you are serving us tap water in plastic cups. Are you completely broke? Have you been lying to us this entire time?" Vivian burst into panicked, desperate tears. She fell to her knees, rushing over to Preston's mother and grabbing her hands. "Please, Margaret, you have to understand," she begged, her voice cracking with pathetic desperation. "Maya is insane. She is a jealous, bitter woman trying to destroy us. We have money. I swear we have money. Please do not leave." But Margaret snatched her hands away, looking at my mother with pure, unadulterated disgust. "Do not touch me, you fraudulent social climbing embarrassment." Margaret spat, wiping her hands on her dress as if Vivian had soiled her. "You lied to us about your wealth. You lied to us about your status. We are leaving right now." The entire Preston family began to gather their expensive coats and designer bags, preparing to march out of the ballroom. Chloe threw herself onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, screaming that her perfect day was ruined and that her life was officially over. My father stood in the center of the chaos, looking like a broken, defeated old man who had just lost the only thing he truly cared about, his fake prestige. I watched them scramble and cry, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, satisfying clarity. They had left me to die on an operating table for this party, and now this party was nothing but plastic cups and public disgrace. But right in the middle of the screaming and the crying, I noticed something strange. Preston was not yelling. He was not packing his bags with his angry parents. He was not comforting his sobbing pregnant wife on the floor. Preston was standing completely still, holding a cheap plastic cup of tap water. He looked around at his furious parents, at my groveling mother, and at his hysterical wife, and then he started to laugh. It was not a nervous laugh or an embarrassed chuckle. It was a dark, low, sinister sound that cut through the noise of the room. It was the laugh of a predator who had just trapped his prey. He tossed the plastic cup aside and began to walk slowly toward me. My two massive security guards instantly stepped forward, crossing their arms to block his path, but I raised my hand and waved them off. I wanted to see what he had to say. Preston stopped just inches away from me. The arrogant smirk on his face had transformed into something deeply evil. He looked me up and down, taking in my sharp suit and my confident posture. "You really think you are so smart, Maya?" he whispered, his voice so low that only I could hear it over the sound of Chloe's crying. "You think coming in here and taking away some cake and champagne makes you a winner? You think exposing your pathetic broke parents gives you power over me?" He leaned in closer, his cold breath brushing against my ear. His words were slow and deliberately calculated to inflict maximum damage. "You should have stayed in that hospital bed," Maya Preston whispered, his voice dripping with pure malice. "Because while you were busy flatlining on that operating table, while your heart was stopped for 2 minutes, your dear parents were very busy too. They signed a document declaring you medically incapacitated. They gave me full emergency medical and financial power of attorney over your life." My breath caught in my throat, but I forced my face to remain entirely blank. Preston smiled, a wide, terrifying grin showing all his teeth. "You do not own your public relations agency anymore, Maya," he said softly. "I do. I signed the transfer papers an hour ago. Every single asset you have built, every dollar you own, is currently being absorbed into my investment fund. You came here to take away our champagne, but I already took your entire empire. Welcome to the real world, little girl. You have absolutely nothing left." The sound of my own laughter felt like a physical release, shaking the heavy toxic tension right out of the room. I pressed a hand to my stomach, carefully supporting my fresh surgical wounds, but I could not stop the waves of pure dark amusement rolling through me. Preston's face shifted from arrogant confidence to rigid confusion. The deep blue eyes that had looked at me with such overwhelming superiority just moments before were now darting back and forth, searching for the trap he suddenly realized he might have stepped into. "What is so funny, Maya?" Preston demanded, his voice losing its smooth, practiced rhythm and pitching upward with genuine anxiety. "Are you having a psychotic break? I told you I control everything. You have zero leverage here. Stop laughing." My father Marcus stepped forward, raising his hand as if he were trying to physically push my laughter back down my throat. "You are completely unhinged, Maya," he shouted, trying to cover his growing panic with aggressive bluster. "Preston just told you that you are ruined, and you stand there giggling like a madwoman. This is exactly why you need a conservatorship. You are mentally unfit to handle your own affairs." I finally caught my breath, waving my hand through the air as if clearing away a foul smell. I wiped a single tear of mirth from the corner of my eye and looked directly at the wealthy white hedge fund manager who thought he could outsmart a black woman who had survived the absolute trenches of the corporate crisis world. "I am not laughing because I am crazy." "Preston," I said, my voice dropping into a deadly calm, measured tone that made the temperature in the room plummet. "I am laughing because you are a hedge fund manager who prides himself on ruthless acquisitions, and yet you just committed the most spectacular financial suicide I have ever witnessed. You did not even do a basic background check on the company you rushed to steal. Preston scoffed loudly, but his hands were visibly shaking. He shoved them deep into the pockets of his expensive trousers to hide the tremor. That is a desperate bluff, Maya. I had my top analysts review your corporate structure the moment your mother called me from the hospital. Your public relations agency is valued at over $40 million. You have high-end contracts, global retainers, and massive liquid assets. I absorbed all of it. The transfer is legally binding. Chloe peeked out from behind his shoulder, her eyes wide and greedy. She is lying, Preston, she hissed, trying to reassure herself more than him. She always lies when she is backed into a corner. Just call the police and have her committed like you promised. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, closing the distance between us. My two security guards moved in perfect synchronization with me, mirroring my dominant stance. I looked Preston up and down, analyzing the precise moment his arrogance began to fully rot from the inside out. You had your analysts review the corporate structure of my agency, I repeated, allowing a sharp, mocking smile to spread across my face. Did they happen to look at the filings from 6 months ago, Preston? Did they check the intellectual property transfers? Or were they moving too fast trying to steal from a woman they thought was going to die before sunrise? My mother. Vivian suddenly grabbed her throat, her heavy diamond rings digging into her own skin. What did you do, Maya? She breathed, her voice hoarse with sudden terror. I did what any smart business owner does when they realize their family is full of vultures, I replied smoothly, turning my gaze to my parents. Last Thanksgiving, when you forced me to pay for the entire family holiday dinner while bragging to your friends about Preston's supposed wealth, I noticed something very interesting. I noticed Preston stepping outside to take panicked phone calls from his investors. I noticed the way his hands shook when he poured his wine. I run crisis management for a living. I know exactly what a desperate, failing executive looks like. So I went back to my office and I did a quiet, deep dive into your precious golden son-in-law's hedge fund. Preston's face turned completely ashen. All the color drained from his skin, leaving him looking like a ghost haunting his own ruined party. You have been hiding a massive toxic debt for over a year, Preston. I continued, raising my voice so it echoed clearly off the ballroom walls. You made a series of catastrophic illegal bets on international crypto exchanges and lost over $50 million of your investors' money. You have been shuffling funds, creating shell companies, and desperately looking for clean capital to absorb so you could hide the massive bleeding hole in your portfolio before the federal regulators came knocking. Marcus stumbled backward, hitting a small cocktail table. The remaining plastic cups rattled loudly against the wood. That is impossible, my father stammered, looking at Preston for denial. Preston comes from old money. His fund is incredibly successful. He told us he was expanding. He lied to you, Dad, I said, shaking my head with deep, profound pity for my father's absolute blindness. He is a fraud. A desperate, drowning fraud who saw my medical emergency as his perfect golden parachute. He thought he could steal my $40 million agency, use my clean assets to patch the hole in his hedge fund, and leave me to rot in an underfunded psychiatric ward. Preston pulled his hands out of his pockets. They were trembling violently now. His cool, calculated demeanor was completely gone, replaced by the erratic, twitching energy of a cornered animal. You are full of it, Maya, he spat, spitting the words out through clenched teeth. It does not matter what you claim to know about my fund. I still control your assets. I still hold the power of attorney. You are mine. I tilted my head, studying him like a fascinating insect trapped in a jar. Do you honestly think I built a $40 million empire without establishing fail-safes? I asked, my voice dripping with cold condescension. Do you think a black woman building her own wealth from the ground up leaves her front door unlocked for greedy, mediocre men like you to just walk inside? I reached inside my tailored blazer and pulled out my cell phone. I tapped the screen once and pulled up a specific legal document, holding it out so Preston could see the bright digital text. 6 months ago, I said, enunciating every single word with lethal precision, I restructured my entire corporate umbrella. I transferred all of my high-end contracts, my global retainers, my liquid assets, and every single piece of valuable intellectual property out of my public relations agency. I sold the core of my business to a massive independent holding company. Preston squinted at the screen, his chest heaving as he read the legal text. His eyes darted wildly, tracking the words as the blood rushed entirely out of his face. The public relations agency that you just legally absorbed using your emergency power of attorney is an empty shell, Preston. I whispered, my voice dropping to a terrifying, dead calm pitch. It is a hollowed-out corporate husk. And the best part. I legally structured that empty shell to hold my agency's outstanding corporate tax liabilities and a massive pending commercial real estate penalty. Chloe let out a sharp, terrified gasp. Vivian began to openly weep, holding her hands over her face, as the horrific realization of what I was saying began to settle over the room. You did not steal $40 million in clean assets, Preston. I smiled, showing all my teeth. You just legally, eagerly, and irreversibly absorbed a massive toxic debt. You just tied your already failing hedge fund to a multi-million-dollar liability, and you signed the paperwork authorizing the federal government to hold you personally responsible for it. You did not steal my empire. You literally stole my garbage and tied it directly around your own neck. Preston staggered backward, as if he had been physically struck by a heavy, blunt object. He grabbed the edge of a nearby table, knocking over a pitcher of tap water that spilled directly onto his expensive Italian leather shoes. He ripped his phone out of his pocket, his fingers slipping and fumbling frantically against the screen as he tried to call his corporate lawyers. He was hyperventilating, gasping for air in short, desperate bursts. Marcus rushed over to him, grabbing Preston's shoulder. Preston? What is she talking about? My father yelled, his voice breaking with sheer panic. Tell me she is lying. Tell me my grandson's future is secure. Preston ignored him, violently shoving my father away. Marcus stumbled and nearly fell to the floor, the ultimate humiliation of a man realizing the white savior he worshipped was actually the architect of his destruction. Who did you sell the assets to? Preston screamed at me, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, hysterical shriek. Who holds the real company, Maya? You cannot do this. I will sue you. I will drag you through federal court. Who owns your actual assets? I did not have to answer him, because at that exact moment, the heavy brass handles of the country club ballroom doors turned again. The doors swung open slowly, deliberately, projecting an aura of absolute terrifying power. 4 men in pristine dark suits marched into the room, instantly fanning out to secure the entrance. And walking right through the center of them, looking like a king surveying his conquered territory, was Elijah Sterling. The 65-year-old billionaire adjusted his immaculate silk tie, taking in the scene of my weeping mother, my terrified father, the sobbing golden child, and the hyperventilating, fraudulent hedge fund manager. Elijah walked straight past my ruined family and stopped right beside me. He placed a warm, deeply protective hand on my shoulder, a gesture of genuine fatherly pride that I had never once received from my actual blood relatives. Elijah looked at Preston and smiled, a slow, dangerous smile that made the entire room feel like a freezing grave. She sold the assets to Sterling Holdings' son, Elijah said, his deep, rich voice commanding absolute total submission. She sold them to me. And looking at the absolute mess you just made of your own life, I would say it was the smartest business decision she ever made. I stepped away from Elijah's protective shadow and began to slowly pace the polished wooden floor of the ballroom. The heavy silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sharp, confident click of my heels. I kept my gaze locked entirely on Preston, watching his arrogant old money posture dissolve into the frantic trembling of a cornered thief. The elite white guests from Boston, who had been bragging about their generational wealth just moments ago, were now backed against the pastel-colored walls, staring at Preston with a mixture of shock and dawning horror. I wanted him to feel the exact weight of his own profound stupidity. I want you to understand exactly when you sealed your own fate, Preston. I said, my voice steady and razor-sharp. It was last Thanksgiving. My parents hosted a lavish dinner specifically to show you off to their elite friends in Atlanta. My father spent $2,000 on a rare bottle of bourbon just to impress you. My mother spent an entire week curating a menu that would appease your high society palate. They treated you like a reigning king holding court in their living room. But I was not looking at the expensive luxury watch on your wrist or the custom tailoring of your suit. I was looking at the cold sweat pooling at your temples. I watched you excuse yourself from the formal dining table 4 different times before we even served the main course. I paused my pacing and stood directly in front of him. You stood out on the freezing patio, pacing back and forth in the dark, barking in panicked, frantic whispers into your cell phone. You thought nobody noticed, because my parents were entirely too busy bragging about your family name to pay attention to your actual behavior. But I build and destroy corporate narratives for a living. I manage crises that would make your head spin. I know exactly what a terrified executive looks like when the margin calls start coming in and the lenders start demanding their money. That night, while you were comfortably eating my mother's perfectly roasted turkey, I went home and hired a private forensic accounting firm to look deep into your supposedly untouchable hedge fund. What they found was an absolute joke. I continued circling him like a predator, admiring caught prey. You had leveraged your family name to secure millions from institutional investors, and then you blew every single cent of it on highly speculative overseas tech ventures trying to prove you were smarter than your father. You were $50 million in the red. Your fund was bleeding out rapidly, and you were desperately circling my family looking for a life raft. You looked at my public relations agency and saw $40 million of clean liquid assets. You saw a self-made black woman and assumed I would be an easy, clueless target for a man with your pedigree and unearned confidence. I stopped pacing and moved to stand right next to Elijah. I brought that forensic financial report straight to Mr. Sterling. He and I sat in his secure boardroom and mapped out exactly how to protect my empire from your greedy, desperate hands. 6 months ago, I legally transferred every single client contract, every registered trademark, every proprietary software system, and every dollar of liquid capital into a newly formed subsidiary, safely tucked under Sterling Holdings. I stripped my original agency entirely bare, but I did not dissolve the original company. I left it sitting there, perfectly intact, I whispered, leaning slightly forward so he could hear the absolute finality in my voice. I left the corporate shell looking completely normal and highly profitable from the outside. But inside, I packed it full of toxic financial waste. I had an ongoing $2 million tax dispute with the federal government regarding an old vendor misclassification alongside a massive financial penalty for a broken commercial real estate lease. I was fully prepared to settle those debts quietly out of my own pocket next quarter. But when I realized you were waiting in the shadows to steal my company, I decided to leave those massive liabilities right inside that empty shell. I gift-wrapped my garbage just for you. And you were so incredibly eager to take it, I said, shaking my head in mock pity. You did not even have the decency to wait until my body was cold. The moment my heart stopped on that operating table, you saw your golden opportunity. You manipulated my deeply insecure, status-obsessed parents into signing an emergency power of attorney. You used their desperate, pathetic need for your approval to get the legal authority to sign my company over to yourself. In your frantic rush to save your failing hedge fund before I woke up from anesthesia, you bypassed every standard procedure of corporate due diligence. You executed a hostile takeover of a toxic liability, I announced, my voice echoing through the massive ballroom. By forcing the merger using the medical power of attorney, your hedge fund legally absorbed the empty shell of my agency. You formally tied your investors' remaining money to my $2 million federal tax debt. You signed the legal documents making yourself personally and corporately responsible for those penalties. You thought you were throwing me out on the street to die, but you just locked yourself inside a burning building and handed me the only key. Elijah let out a low, rumbling chuckle that sounded like distant thunder. You know, Preston? Elijah said, adjusting his immaculate custom cuffs. I have dealt with a lot of arrogant men in my lifetime, but there is a special kind of staggering stupidity reserved for a mediocre man who thinks his trust fund makes him invincible. You looked at Maya and saw a stepping stone. You thought you could outsmart a black woman who built her empire from the dirt while you were born on third base and still managed to strike out. Now you owe me and the federal government millions of dollars, and I am not nearly as forgiving as she is. Chloe let out a piercing, dramatic wail, collapsing against the pastel gift table. Her fake diamond tiara slipped off her hair and clattered pathetically to the hardwood floor. My father, Marcus, grabbed his own chest, his face a mask of absolute sheer horror. He had sold out his own eldest daughter and authorized the theft of her life's work, all to impress a man who was actually a broke, desperate fraud. Vivian was rocking back and forth on her knees, mumbling incoherently as the illusion of her high society life disintegrated into dust right in front of the elite families she had worshipped. Preston was completely unable to speak. His jaw worked silently, his eyes wide and severely bloodshot. He grabbed his phone, frantically swiping at the screen, his thumbs slipping on the glass as he tried to access his secure banking application. He was desperately hoping that the asset transfer had not fully processed, yet hoping he could somehow reverse the catastrophic corporate merger before his compliance officers noticed the massive influx of toxic debt. He punched in his security codes, his breath coming in ragged, panicked gasps. But the digital gears had already locked firmly into place. The dead silence in the country club ballroom was suddenly shattered by a sharp, piercing electronic ring. Preston's phone vibrated violently in his shaking palm. He stared down at the caller identification screen, and all the remaining blood drained completely from his face. It was the primary institutional bank that backed his entire hedge fund. Before the first ring even finished, a second call, notification beeped loudly over the speaker. Then a third. The screen lit up with a rapid, relentless barrage of incoming calls from his risk management team, his board of directors, and the Federal Tax Compliance Office. The avalanche of debt had officially hit his accounts, and his entire fake empire was crashing down in real time. Preston threw his violently vibrating phone against the marble wall, shattering the screen into a spiderweb of useless glass. The sharp cracking sound snapped whatever fragile thread of sanity he had left. His face contorted into an ugly, violently red mask of pure hatred. He let out a guttural scream and lunged directly at me with his hands outstretched, aiming straight for my throat. He did not care about the hundreds of high society guests watching. He only cared that a black woman had outsmarted him and ruined his life. He never even made it within 3 feet of me. My security guards moved like a synchronized wall of solid muscle. One guard caught Preston by the lapels of his custom cashmere sweater and effortlessly shoved him backward. Preston stumbled over a fallen chair and crashed hard onto the polished hardwood floor, scrambling desperately to catch his breath. Seeing her precious son thrown to the ground completely shattered Margaret's thin, polite veneer. The polite high society mask melted away instantly, revealing the raw, ugly prejudice that had always been lurking just beneath the surface of this wealthy white family. Margaret stepped forward, her voice shrill and echoing across the silent ballroom. "You people are absolute animals," she shrieked, pointing a shaking diamond-covered finger at my parents. "We knew we should never have let Preston marry into this family. You are nothing but a pack of gold-digging, fraudulent street trash trying to steal our generational wealth. We let you sit at our tables. We let you into our clubs. And this is how you repay us. You drag us into your ghetto schemes and try to destroy my son." The racist, classist venom in Margaret's words should have been enough to make my father punch a wall. It should have been enough to make my mother grab her purse, lift her chin, and walk out with whatever shred of dignity she had left. But they did not. To my absolute disgust, Marcus and Vivian actually shrank down, physically cowering before these angry white aristocrats. Vivian fell to her knees, reaching out to grab the hem of Margaret's expensive dress. "Margaret, please!" My mother sobbed, her voice cracking with pathetic desperation. "We had absolutely nothing to do with this. Maya is unstable. She has always been a bitter, jealous girl. We disown her. We have nothing to do with her actions. Please do not blame our family for her crimes. Chloe is carrying your grandson." My father turned his panicked, furious eyes on me. "Maya, fix this right now!" He roared, his voice trembling with the intense fear of losing his country club status. "You are going to call your lawyers and reverse this transaction immediately. You will get on your knees and apologize to Preston and his parents. You are destroying our family name. You are ruining the most important relationship we have ever built." I stood perfectly still, looking down at them from my position. I felt a sudden wave of deep, profound pity mixed with absolute revulsion. "Look at yourselves," I said, my voice echoing clearly over my mother's pathetic crying. "They just called you street trash. They just told you exactly how they have always seen you. You spent your entire lives twisting yourselves into knots, sacrificing your culture and your eldest daughter just to be allowed in the back door of their world. And the moment things go wrong, they remind you that you will never truly be one of them. You are begging on your knees to people who actively hate you." Preston scrambled to his feet, adjusting his torn sweater. His face twisted into a smug, desperate sneer. "You think a little speech changes anything?" Preston spat, wiping a line of sweat from his forehead. "My family has owned banks in this country for 200 years. We have entire law firms on retainer who will absolutely crush you. We will tie you up in federal litigation for the rest of your pathetic life. We will bury you and your cheap little street hustle so deep you will never see the light of day again." He did not get to finish his threat. The heavy brass handles of the grand ballroom doors suddenly turned with a loud metallic clank. The doors swung open slowly and deliberately, projecting an aura of absolute terrifying power that instantly silenced the room. 4 men in pristine dark suits marched into the ballroom, instantly fanning out to secure the entrance. They moved with a quiet military precision that made my own security detail look like rookies. And walking right through the center of them, looking like a king surveying a conquered territory, was Elijah Sterling. The 65-year-old self-made billionaire adjusted his immaculate silk tie, taking in the scene of my weeping mother, my terrified father, the sobbing golden child, and the hyperventilating fraudulent hedge fund manager. Elijah walked straight past my ruined family and stopped right beside me. His presence alone was an overwhelming force of true, undeniable black wealth and power that instantly suffocated the arrogant old money entitlement of the Preston family. Elijah Sterling did not raise his voice. He did not need to. True power never has to shout. He simply looked down at Preston, who was still trembling on the polished hardwood floor, and smiled a cold, unforgiving smile. "You must be the boy who plays with other people's money," Elijah said. His deep baritone voice echoed off the crystal chandeliers, commanding the absolute attention of every single person in the ballroom. "Let me explain how real wealth works, Preston. You do not rush to acquire a corporate entity without understanding exactly who holds its debt. That empty public relations shell you so eagerly stole from Maya holds a massive commercial real estate penalty. The lease was broken on a premium downtown property, and the landlord was highly motivated to collect." Elijah took one slow, deliberate step forward, forcing Preston to scramble backward like a frightened child. "I am the landlord," Elijah announced. "I own the building. I hold the debt. You owe me $2 million in cash, and the payment became due in full the exact second you signed that fraudulent emergency power of attorney. You thought you were stealing a gold mine, but you just bought your own financial execution." Preston gasped for air, his chest heaving violently under his ruined cashmere sweater. "I do not have $2 million in liquid cash right now," he stammered, his voice cracking with pure terror. "My fund is tied up. I need time. I can set up a payment plan. My family can vouch for my credit." "I do not take payment plans from arrogant thieves," Elijah fired back, his tone dropping to a lethal whisper. "You will wire those funds to my holding company by the close of business today. If the money is not in my account by 5 o'clock, my lawyers will legally seize your entire hedge fund. We will liquidate your personal assets. We will take your cars, your Boston estate, and the expensive watch currently shaking on your wrist. And when I am done stripping you down to nothing, I will hand all of your financial records over to the federal authorities so they can investigate exactly where your investors' $50 million went." Preston turned his desperate, panicked eyes toward his parents. He reached out a trembling hand toward his mother, Margaret, the woman who had just seconds ago called my family street trash. "Mom," Preston pleaded, his voice breaking. "Mom, you have to help me. Talk to Dad. You can wire the money from the family trust. You have to bail me out." I watched as the great, unshakable loyalty of the Boston elite completely dissolved in the blink of an eye. Margaret looked at her son, not with maternal love, but with absolute disgust. In her world, a financial scandal of this magnitude was a permanent stain, a social death sentence that would get them exiled from their exclusive country clubs and high society galas. She took another sharp step away from him, pulling her expensive coat tightly around her shoulders. "Do not look at me!" Margaret snapped, her voice trembling with rage and humiliation. "Your father and I warned you about your reckless investments. We told you to stop playing with those overseas tech ventures. We are not draining the family trust to cover your criminal negligence. You made this disgusting mess, Preston, and you will clean it up yourself. We are leaving." Preston's father did not even look at his son. He simply turned on his heel and marched toward the exit, his face flushed with profound embarrassment. Margaret followed closely behind him, refusing to look back. The wealthy white aristocrats, who had spent the entire afternoon looking down their noses at my family, were literally running away, abandoning their own flesh and blood to protect their precious reputation. Elijah turned his attention away from the pathetic crying man on the floor and looked directly at me. He placed a warm, steady hand on my shoulder. He spoke loudly, ensuring that every remaining guest and every single member of my family heard him crystal clear. "Maya has more brilliance and integrity in her little finger than this entire room combined," Elijah declared. "When my empire was under attack, she stood in the fire and saved my life's work. She is the brilliant daughter I never had. Sterling Holdings protects its own. I want everyone in this city to understand that anyone who disrespects her, anyone who tries to steal from her or harm her, is declaring war on me." The silence that followed his declaration was absolute. The power dynamic in the room had irreversibly shifted. I was no longer the scapegoat daughter, the unwanted burden, or the failing hairstylist my parents had pretended I was. I was under the direct, explicit protection of a billionaire titan. The reality of the situation finally crashed down on Chloe. The fake diamond tiara lay forgotten on the floor, as she realized her entire identity had just been annihilated. She was not the wealthy, high society wife she desperately wanted to be. She was legally tied to a broke, fraudulent criminal who was about to lose everything and likely go to federal prison. Chloe let out an agonizing, high-pitched scream. She ripped the pastel maternity sash off her dress, throwing it across the room. She collapsed onto her knees, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe, her perfect makeup running down her face in thick black streaks. She screamed at Preston, cursing him for ruining her life, for lying to her about his wealth, and for making her a laughingstock in front of her friends. My parents, Marcus and Vivian, stood frozen, watching the Preston family abandon their son and watching Chloe suffer a total mental breakdown on the ballroom floor. They looked at Preston, the man they had worshipped, the man they had been willing to let me die for. He was nothing but a pathetic, weeping fraud. Then they looked at me, standing tall and protected beside one of the most powerful men in the country. Their brains frantically calculated the new reality. They realized instantly that they had backed the wrong horse. They had sacrificed the wrong daughter. What happened next was the most vile, repulsive display of hypocrisy I had ever witnessed in my entire life. My mother, Vivian, wiped the tears of humiliation from her face and completely changed her entire demeanor in a fraction of a second. The woman who had just tried to slap me across the face, the woman who had demanded I be thrown out of the hospital, the woman who had called me a disgrace, suddenly threw herself onto the hardwood floor. She crawled across the space between us, her expensive silk dress dragging against the polished wood. Marcus dropped to his knees right beside her, his pride completely vanishing in the face of sheer desperation. They scrambled toward me, reaching out with trembling hands. Vivian grabbed the fabric of my trousers, clutching my pant leg as if I were her only lifeline. "Maya, please," Vivian cried, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet, desperate affection that made my stomach turn. "Maya, my beautiful girl, you have to help us. You have to tell Mr. Sterling to forgive the debt. Please tell him to stop the lawyers." I looked down at my mother, feeling a wave of absolute disgust, so powerful it nearly knocked the breath out of my lungs. Are you actually begging me to save the man who just tried to steal my entire company? I asked, my voice echoing with disbelief. He is family now, Marcus pleaded, his voice cracking as he gripped my other leg, looking up at me with wide, terrified eyes. You cannot do this to your sister. Look at her, Maya. Chloe is having a breakdown. She is carrying your nephew. You cannot let the father of your unborn nephew go to prison or go completely bankrupt. We are a family. Families forgive each other. You have to fix this, Maya. Vivian sobbed, burying her face against my knee, pulling at my clothes like a desperate child. We made a mistake, but you have the power to stop it. Tell Mr. Sterling to let Preston go. Do it for the baby Maya. You cannot be so cruel to an innocent baby. Please save us. I looked down at the pathetic scene unfolding at my feet. My mother Vivian was still clutching the fabric of my trousers, her tears soaking into the dark wool of my suit. The woman who had spent my entire life meticulously curating an image of untouchable high society elegance was now crawling on the polished hardwood floor of the country club. Her heavy diamond rings scraped against the floorboards as she desperately tightened her grip on my leg. Beside her, my father Marcus was kneeling in his custom-tailored suit, his shoulders trembling as he begged me to save the very man who had just tried to steal my entire livelihood. The sheer audacity of their demands was breathtaking. They were not apologizing for leaving me to die alone on an operating table. They were not expressing any remorse for secretly signing away my $40 million company to an arrogant white hedge fund manager while I was unconscious. They were simply demanding that I use my influence with Elijah Sterling to rescue Preston from his own catastrophic financial crimes. They wanted me to protect the man who had just attempted to ruin my life simply because he was married to their golden child. I slowly pulled my leg back, breaking my mother's desperate grip. I took a deliberate step away from them, creating a cold physical boundary. I walked over to a nearby cocktail table and picked up one of the cheap plastic cups filled with cloudy tap water, the exact same water I had ordered the staff to serve them earlier. I took a slow, calm sip, letting the silence in the ballroom stretch out until the tension became absolutely suffocating. In the background, Chloe was still curled in a tight ball on the floor, sobbing hysterically over her ruined tiara and her impending bankruptcy. Preston stood completely paralyzed near the exit, staring blankly at the floor as his entire fake empire burned to ash around him. Vivian scrambled forward again, refusing to give up her manipulative tactics. Maya, please, you have to listen to me, she cried, her voice echoing with a sickly sweet maternal desperation. You cannot do this to your own sister. Chloe is carrying your nephew. She is pregnant and fragile. The stress of a federal investigation and losing all her money could be dangerous for the baby. You cannot send a pregnant woman into bankruptcy, Maya. Blood is thicker than water. We are your family. You have to tell Mr. Sterling to forgive Preston's debt. Do it for the innocent child. I stared at my mother, letting her hypocritical words wash over me. She was trying to weaponize my morality. She was trying to use a completely innocent unborn child as a human shield to protect a deeply corrupt man. I lowered the plastic cup and looked directly into my mother's tear-streaked eyes. I let the cold, dead silence hang between us for a long, terrible moment before I finally spoke. Tomorrow I have a board meeting, I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion, perfectly mimicking the exact cadence of a robotic automated response. I cannot leave my schedule or ruin my day for whatever drama you are creating right now. Call an Uber, or better yet, call a good defense lawyer. Vivian froze completely. Her mouth fell open, and the fake, desperate tears instantly stopped flowing down her cheeks. She recognized those exact words. She recognized the precise, cold phrasing she had typed out and sent to me while my appendix was rupturing inside my body. The realization that I was throwing her own horrific cruelty directly back into her face hit her like a physical blow. She slumped back onto her heels, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. Marcus saw that the maternal guilt trip had completely failed. He realized that begging on his knees was not going to manipulate me into saving their precious social standing. In the blink of an eye, his entire demeanor shifted violently. The desperate, pleading father vanished, and the arrogant, controlling narcissist returned with a vengeance. He stood up, brushing the dust off the knees of his expensive suit. His face contorted into a mask of pure venomous rage. "You think you can do this to us?" Marcus growled, stepping aggressively toward me. "You think you can humiliate this family and just walk away clean? You think hiding behind a billionaire makes you untouchable? You are making a massive mistake, Maya." Elijah Sterling shifted his weight slightly, his towering presence immediately reminding my father not to take another aggressive step. Marcus stopped in his tracks, but his eyes burned with a furious, toxic hatred. He decided to use the only weapon he had left, his connections within the elite Black community of Atlanta. "I sit on the board of the most prestigious alumni associations in this city," Marcus threatened, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous hiss. "Your mother and I have spent decades building relationships with every major charity organization, every fraternity, and every elite social club in the South. You run a public relations agency, Maya. Your entire business relies on your reputation within our community. If you do not tell Sterling to back off right now, I swear to God I will destroy you." I did not flinch. I just stood there watching a man who was supposed to protect me actively threaten to annihilate my career. "I will go to every major Black media outlet in Atlanta." Marcus continued, his face turning a dark, angry red. "I will call every publisher, every influencer, and every community leader we know. I will tell them exactly what kind of ruthless, backstabbing daughter you really are. I will tell them that you abandoned your pregnant sister when she needed you most. I will spin this entire story to make you look like a greedy, heartless traitor who sold out her own flesh and blood just to advance her corporate career. By the time I am done with you, your crisis PR firm will be completely radioactive. No respectable business owner in this city will ever hire you again. You will be a social pariah." It was the ultimate narcissistic threat. My father did not care that I had almost died. He did not care that Preston had actively tried to steal my life's work. The only thing Marcus cared about was public perception, and he was fully prepared to burn my name to the ground just to maintain his own fragile illusion of power. He honestly believed that the threat of being exiled from high society would force me to surrender. He thought I was just as desperate for social validation as he was. I looked at my father and felt a deep, profound sense of liberation. For 30 years, I had lived in fear of their judgment. I had exhausted myself trying to be the perfect daughter, trying to earn a seat at a table that was actively designed to exclude me. But staring into his hateful eyes, I realized I did not want a seat at their table anymore. I owned the entire building. "You want to go to the media?" "Dad?" I asked, my voice perfectly calm, cutting through his angry rant like a newly sharpened blade. "You want to call the publishers and the community leaders and tell them a story about our family. That is a brilliant idea. In fact, as a public relations expert, I highly recommend you provide the media with some compelling evidence to back up your claims." I reached inside the inner pocket of my tailored blazer. I did not break eye contact with Marcus as my fingers wrapped around the cold metal casing of my cell phone. I pulled the device out and unlocked the screen, tapping smoothly into my audio files. "If you are going to pitch a story to the press, Dad, you need a really strong hook," I said softly, tapping the volume button on the side of my phone to ensure it was turned all the way up. "You need something visceral, something that really captures the true, authentic dynamic of the Washington family. Let me give you the perfect audio clip for your big press release." Marcus frowned, his arrogant expression faltering slightly as a new wave of uncertainty washed over his face. Vivian let out a soft, nervous gasp, her eyes locked onto the screen of my phone. Chloe stopped sobbing entirely, lifting her head from the floor to stare at me in fearful confusion. Even Preston turned his head, his bloodshot eyes watching me with paranoid dread. I did not hesitate for a single second. I held the phone up high so the speaker faced directly toward my parents, and I firmly pressed the play button. A sharp crackle of static echoed through the grand ballroom, cutting through the heavy, suffocating silence. Then the unmistakable rhythmic sound of a hospital heart monitor filled the air. The audio was crystal clear, capturing the cold, sterile acoustics of the intensive care unit. Every single person in the country club froze. The tired, urgent voice of the lead surgeon played loudly through the speaker. He was saying, "Sir, ma'am, you need to listen to me carefully. Your daughter just survived severe cardiac arrest. The septic infection is aggressive. She needs immediate authorization for a secondary surgery and a massive blood transfusion if she is going to make it through the night." Then came the voice of my mother, Vivian. It was not filled with panic. It was not trembling with maternal grief. It was dripping with profound irritation. "Doctor, you have to understand our position," Vivian's recorded voice complained bitterly. "We have a massive event today. The entire Preston family flew in from Boston. They are old money. We are hosting them at the country club in less than an hour. We absolutely cannot be sitting in a waiting room all day waiting for a miracle that might not even happen." A collective gasp ripped through the crowd of onlookers. The wealthy elite guests, the country club staff, and the catering crew all stared at Vivian in sheer disbelief. But the recording was not over. The worst was yet to come. The doctor's voice returned, sounding completely appalled. "Mom, your daughter is fighting for her life right now. I need you to sign the financial consent forms so we can save her." Then my father Marcus spoke. His booming, authoritative voice rang out from my phone, stripped of all its usual fake charm and polished high society grace. It was the raw, ugly voice of a man who only cared about his own prestige. "Look, doctor, let us be realistic here," Marcus's recorded voice scoffed. "She flatlined for 2 minutes. Her brain was deprived of oxygen. Even if you cut her open again and she wakes up, she is going to be a vegetable. She is going to be a massive financial burden. We are not paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to keep a lost cause alive on machines. We have a $10,000 catering deposit at the club and guests waiting. Just pull the plug. Stop the machines and give us the death certificate so we can get out of here. We are already running late." "Yes, exactly," Vivian's recorded voice quickly agreed. "She has always been fiercely independent. She would not want to be a financial burden on us anyway. Just end it, doctor. We need to leave." I firmly pressed the button on the side of my phone, stopping the recording. The audio cut off, leaving the grand ballroom plunged into a terrifying, dead silence. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. It was the silence of pure, unadulterated horror. I did not move a single muscle. I stood perfectly still, letting the sheer brutality of their own words hang in the air like a thick, poisonous fog. I watched the blood drain completely out of my father's face, leaving him looking like a hollowed-out corpse. I watched Vivian collapse backward, landing hard on the polished wooden floor. Her hands were shaking so violently she could not even prop herself up. My father had just threatened to destroy my reputation in the elite black community of Atlanta. He had threatened to call the publishers, the community leaders, and the charity boards to tell them I was a heartless traitor who abandoned her family. But now, every single prominent member of that community standing in this very room had just heard the undeniable truth. They had just heard Marcus and Vivian willingly sentence their own eldest daughter to death to avoid being late for a baby shower. In the black community, abandoning your own child for the sake of impressing a wealthy white family is the ultimate unforgivable sin. The social execution my father had planned for me had just violently reversed course and completely annihilated him. "That is fake!" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking with wild, desperate panic. He lunged forward, reaching blindly for my phone. "That is artificial intelligence. She is a public relations spin doctor. She fabricated that audio to destroy us. Do not listen to her. He did not even make it one full step." Elijah Sterling's massive security guards instantly grabbed Marcus by the shoulders and slammed him forcefully back down onto the floor. "It is not fabricated," Elijah said, his deep baritone voice echoing with absolute freezing contempt. "My personal security team retrieved the raw security camera footage directly from the hospital administration this morning. We have the video file to match the audio. We watched you stand outside your daughter's intensive care room and order a surgeon to murder her so you could drink champagne with a hedge fund manager. You are not just frauds, Marcus. You are monsters." The remaining elite guests physically backed away from my parents. The wealthy socialites who had happily drank my father's expensive bourbon and praised my mother's designer dresses just an hour ago now looked at them with pure physical revulsion. My parents were completely, utterly ruined. Their status, their reputation, their carefully curated empire of lies had been burned down to the foundation. Chloe was hyperventilating on the floor, clutching her pregnant stomach, rocking back and forth as her perfect world collapsed. She finally realized that the parents she had worshipped, the parents who had crowned her the golden child, would have gladly left her to die too, if it meant saving their own social standing. There was no loyalty in this family. There was only convenience. I looked down at Marcus and Vivian, feeling an overwhelming sense of peace wash over my tired, bruised body. The heavy chains of obligation of trying to be the perfect daughter for people who despised me simply shattered and fell away. I owed them absolutely nothing. But the war was not entirely over. While my parents were drowning in their public social execution, Preston had been doing his own frantic calculations. The arrogant white hedge fund manager had been standing near the exit watching his entire fraudulent scheme fall apart. He knew that the $2 million commercial real estate debt he had just legally absorbed from my dummy corporation was going to trigger a federal investigation into his hedge fund. He knew Elijah Sterling was going to crush him financially and send him to federal prison. Preston realized that playing the victim was not going to work. Pleading for mercy was not going to work. So he decided to do the only thing men like him know how to do when they are backed into a corner. He decided to weaponize the government. Preston pulled his shattered cell phone out of his pocket. His hands were shaking, but his eyes were filled with a dark, manic desperation. He ignored his sobbing wife on the floor. He ignored my disgraced parents. He stared directly at me with a look of pure, venomous hatred and dialed a number he knew by heart. "Get me Senator Bradley," Preston barked into the phone the moment the line connected. "Tell him it is Preston. Tell him it is a financial emergency regarding his campaign contributions." Elijah narrowed his eyes, watching Preston carefully. Senator Bradley was a powerful, ruthless politician who had been backed by the old money families of Boston for decades. He was notorious for using his political influence to bury federal investigations and protect the generational wealth of his donors. "Listen to me carefully," Senator Preston said, his voice shaking with furious adrenaline. "I need you to make an emergency call to the Federal Banking Commission right now. I was just the victim of a massive corporate wire fraud. A woman named Maya Washington just illegally dumped a multi-million-dollar tax liability into my hedge fund using fraudulent intellectual property transfers. I need you to freeze her personal and business bank accounts immediately. Yes, all of them. Freeze every single asset under Sterling Holdings related to her agency pending a federal tax evasion investigation." Preston lowered the phone and looked at me with a sick, triumphant grin. "You think you are the only one who can play chess? Maya," he sneered, his chest heaving. "You think having a billionaire on your side makes you invincible? My family bought and paid for the politicians in this state before you were even born. I just froze your entire life. You cannot access a single dime. You cannot pay your lawyers. You cannot pay your staff. You are completely paralyzed." Preston stepped forward, kicking a broken champagne flute out of his way. "You have exactly 24 hours, he threatened, his voice dropping into a vicious growl. "Tomorrow night is the annual charity gala downtown. Every major political and financial player in the state will be there. You are going to walk onto that stage, take the microphone, and publicly declare that your asset transfer was a clerical error. You are going to sign my hedge fund out of that toxic debt and take the $2 million penalty back onto your own shoulders. If you do not beg for my forgiveness in front of the entire city tomorrow night, I will have the senator keep your accounts locked until the federal government seizes everything you own. You will go to prison for tax fraud and I will walk away clean." I turned away from his flushed, frantic face and walked slowly across the polished hardwood floor. My heels clicked in a steady, hypnotic rhythm, cutting through the suffocating tension that had gripped the room. I moved toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the impeccably manicured lawns of the country club. I looked out at the rolling green hills and the pristine golf course. It was a playground built exclusively for men exactly like Preston. A world designed to protect generational wealth and insulate them from the consequences of their own staggering incompetence. I stood there for a long moment, letting the afternoon light catch the sharp lines of my tailored suit. Then I turned back to face him. I did not tremble. I did not drop to my knees. I let a slow, chilling smile spread across my face. Preston's chest was heaving. He stood there clutching his phone like it was a loaded weapon, expecting me to crumble. He fully expected the terrifying weight of the federal government and the institutional machinery of an old money politician to break my spine. He thought that because he could make one desperate phone call to a corrupt senator, he had automatically won the war. My father Marcus instantly saw a glimmer of hope in Preston's political threat. The moment Marcus realized the white establishment might still have the upper hand, his allegiance violently pivoted yet again. He scrambled up from the floor, pulling Vivian up beside him. "Maya, you need to listen to him right now," Marcus pleaded, his voice completely stripped of its former venom, now replaced by cowardly, frantic urgency. "You cannot fight Senator Bradley. You cannot fight the Federal Banking Commission. They will lock you in a cage and throw away the key. Preston is offering you a way out. Tomorrow night is the Unity Charity Gala. Every major political figure in Atlanta will be sitting in the front row. Just go up to the podium and apologize. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Give him the company back. Do it to save your own life." Vivian nodded vigorously, her ruined makeup making her look like a terrifying, tragic clown. "Please, Maya," Vivian begged, gripping her own hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. "A public apology is nothing compared to federal prison. We can spin it. We can tell everyone you were confused from the surgery. We can save the family reputation. Just give Preston what he wants so we can all go back to normal." I looked at my parents, feeling a wave of absolute profound disgust. They were actively encouraging their daughter to commit federal perjury and take on $2 million of toxic corporate debt just to appease a white man who had literally tried to rob me blind. They were perfectly willing to let me destroy my own pristine reputation and risk my own freedom as long as they did not lose their precious country club privileges. I shifted my gaze back to Preston. His arrogant smirk had fully returned. He thought my silence was the sound of surrender. He thought the sight of my parents begging me to capitulate was the final nail in my coffin. "You think freezing my checking accounts freezes my mind, Preston?" I asked, my voice dropping into a deadly calm pitch that echoed off the crystal chandeliers. "You think cutting off my access to liquid capital suddenly erases the 10 years I spent building a crisis management empire? I destroy corrupt politicians for breakfast. I bury arrogant, fraudulent executives before my morning coffee. You just threatened a public relations expert with a public scandal. You did not corner me, Preston. You just handed me a microphone." Preston scoffed, taking a confident step forward. "You are bluffing," he spat. "You have no money to pay your legal team. You have no resources. Tomorrow night at the gala, you are going to walk onto that stage in front of the mayor, the governor, and every elite family in this state. You are going to look into the cameras, and you are going to beg for my forgiveness. If you try anything else, I will have the senator sign the seizure orders before the dessert is even served. You have 24 hours, Maya." Elijah Sterling, who had been standing silently by my side, simply crossed his arms over his chest. The billionaire titan did not intervene. He did not offer to call his own politicians or throw his massive wealth at the problem. He just watched me with a look of deep, quiet pride. He knew exactly what I was capable of. He knew that a true queen does not need someone else to hold her sword when it is time to go to war. "I will be at the gala tomorrow night, Preston," I said, keeping my posture perfectly straight and my voice dripping with lethal grace. "I will wear a stunning dress. I will walk right up to that stage and I will take the microphone. I gladly accept your invitation." Preston laughed, a harsh, victorious sound that grated against the walls of the ballroom. Chloe let out a long, shaky breath of relief, finally pulling herself up from the floor. She actually believed her perfect life had just been magically rescued by her husband's political connections. My parents slumped against each other, exhaling heavily, convinced that their groveling had convinced me to fall back into line. I did not say another word to any of them. I turned on my heel, my security detail instantly falling into perfect formation around me. We walked away from the ruined pastel baby shower, leaving the overturned tables, the plastic water cups, and the deeply pathetic family staring after us. Elijah matched my stride, his presence a silent, massive shield as we exited the grand double doors of the country club. The moment the heavy oak doors closed behind us, cutting off the stifling air of my family's hypocrisy, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my cell phone. The battery was low, but I only needed 30 seconds. I bypassed my frozen personal accounts and dialed the secure encrypted line directly to the war room of my crisis PR agency. My lead strategist picked up on the first ring. Lock down the secure servers, I ordered, my mind already moving 10 steps ahead of Preston's pathetic political trap. Preston just used Senator Bradley to initiate an illegal freeze on my personal assets. We are going scorched earth. I need you to pull every single piece of dirt we have gathered on the senator's offshore accounts. Pull the wire transfer logs from Preston's failing hedge fund. Package it all into a synchronized digital blast. I paused at the top of the marble steps, letting the warm Atlanta breeze hit my face. Initiate campaign, falling masks. I instructed, my voice completely steady and utterly ruthless. Prepare the media packets for an immediate embargoed release. Target every major news outlet, federal watchdog, and high society publisher in the state. Do not release a single word until I give the signal tomorrow night. Prepare a surprise for them at the gala. Let us show this city exactly what happens when you try to bury a woman who controls the narrative. The crystal chandeliers of the Atlanta Grand Civic Center cast a warm golden glow over the most exclusive charity gala of the entire year. The massive ballroom was a sea of tailored tuxedos and custom designer gowns. Every major political figure, wealthy real estate developer, and media mogul in the state was seated at the velvet-draped tables sipping expensive champagne. It was the ultimate gathering of power and influence. My parents, Marcus and Vivian, walked through the grand double doors with their heads held impossibly high. They had spent the last 24 hours terrified, but Preston had convinced them his corrupt political connections had completely neutralized me. They wore their absolute best formal wear, projecting the fake, untouchable arrogance of the elite. Vivian adjusted her diamond necklace while Marcus shook hands with local politicians, acting as though the horrific recording of them at the hospital had never even existed. Chloe waddled in beside Preston, wearing a glittering silver maternity dress. She looked incredibly smug, fully believing her wealthy white husband had successfully weaponized the federal government against her own sister. Preston was practically glowing with arrogant victory. He adjusted his silk bow tie and mingled with the senators and judges, playing the role of the generous billionaire philanthropist to absolute perfection. He was completely certain that my bank accounts were frozen solid by his political allies. He truly believed I was standing somewhere in the shadows, completely broken, terrified, and ready to surrender my $40 million company to him in front of the entire city. The room quieted down as the gala host announced the keynote speaker. Preston walked confidently up the velvet stairs to the main stage. He gripped the edges of the clear acrylic podium and leaned into the microphone. He put on his best fake sympathetic smile, smoothing his features into an expression of deep manufactured concern. He told the silent audience that family was the most important thing in the world. He said his sister-in-law, Maya, had made a terrible clerical error with her business transfers, causing a massive legal misunderstanding. But because he was a generous, forgiving man, he was going to allow her to come up to the stage and publicly set the record straight. He looked out into the glittering crowd, waiting for me to crawl up to the microphone and beg for his mercy. I walked down the center aisle. I was not wearing the muted, quiet colors of a defeated woman. I wore a striking crimson-red gown that demanded absolute attention from every single person in the room. My spine was perfectly straight, and my heels clicked sharply against the polished marble floor. I did not look at the ground. I looked directly into Preston's cold blue eyes. My parents smirked from their front row table, eagerly waiting for my ultimate public humiliation. I walked up the stairs and stepped to the podium. Preston moved aside, crossing his arms over his chest with a victorious sneer. He fully expected me to pull out a crumpled piece of paper and read a desperate, prepared apology to save myself from federal prison. But my hands were completely empty. I did not lean into the microphone. I did not say a single word. Instead, I looked past the stage toward the elevated sound booth in the back of the massive auditorium. I caught the eye of my lead public relations strategist, who was standing right behind the audio-visual technician. I gave him a single sharp, unwavering nod. I stepped back from the podium as the massive floor-to-ceiling LED screen behind the stage suddenly buzzed to life. The entire ballroom gasped in unison. It was not a corporate logo or a heartwarming charity presentation. The massive screen lit up in bright, blinding high definition, displaying perfectly clear digital copies of federal arrest warrants and heavily classified offshore wire transfer records. The collective gasp from 500 of the most powerful people in Atlanta sucked all the oxygen out of the grand ballroom. On the massive high-definition screen illuminating the stage, the heavily classified offshore wire transfer records were displayed in crisp, undeniable detail. Beside them were the federal arrest warrants stamped and signed by a federal judge just hours ago. Preston slowly turned his head to look at the screen. The smug, victorious smirk that had been plastered across his face completely melted away, replaced by the sheer hollow terror of a man who just realized he was standing on a landmine. He frantically grabbed the edges of the clear acrylic podium, his knuckles turning stark white. He looked out into the glittering crowd, desperately searching the front rows for his political savior. Senator Bradley Preston shouted into the microphone, his voice cracking into a high-pitched panic. "Senator Bradley, you promised me. You said you froze her accounts. You said you took care of this." Elijah Sterling stood up slowly from his center table. He buttoned his custom tuxedo jacket with infuriating calm. The entire ballroom fell dead silent, waiting for the billionaire titan to speak. "Your corrupt politician is not going to save you, boy." Elijah's deep baritone voice boomed across the silent room, requiring no microphone at all to command absolute authority. Senator Bradley tried to make that phone call to the Banking Commission last night. But he quickly changed his mind when my legal team informed him that Maya had already submitted a complete, unredacted dossier of your financial crimes directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. A politician might protect a wealthy donor, but no senator is going to sacrifice his own career to protect a sinking ship actively being investigated for federal wire fraud. Maya's bank accounts were never frozen. You never had any leverage at all. You just walked willingly onto a stage to publicly confess. I stepped back up to the microphone, pulling it smoothly from its stand. I looked right at Preston, who was now hyperventilating, his perfectly styled hair falling limply across his sweaty forehead. I flashed him a radiant, razor-sharp smile. "You see, Preston," I said, my voice echoing clearly over the massive sound system. "When you stole $50 million, you did not just steal from anonymous corporate investors. The documents on this screen prove exactly where you transferred those funds from. You drained the trusts of the very Boston elite who looked down their noses at my family. You stole from your own aunts, your uncles, and the generational shareholders of your own family's wealth. You robbed the old money aristocrats blind just to cover your reckless overseas gambling. And the moment I hit send on those emails this afternoon, your own family actively cooperated with the federal authorities to have you locked away." Right on cue, the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom were thrown violently open. A team of federal agents wearing dark tactical windbreakers over their formal wear marched down the center aisle. Their heavy boots echoed against the marble floor, a terrifying rhythmic drumbeat that signaled the absolute end of Preston's fake empire. The crowd parted instantly, giving the agents a wide, clear path to the stage. Preston began to back away, shaking his head wildly. "No," he sobbed, holding his hands up as if he could physically push the federal agents away. "No, you do not understand. I come from a good family. I have money. You cannot do this to me." The lead federal agent did not even blink. He grabbed Preston by the shoulder, spun him around, and slammed him face first against the clear acrylic podium. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs snapping shut around Preston's wrists echoed loudly through the microphone. The agent began reading him his Miranda rights, citing multiple counts of federal wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and tax evasion. Preston cried like a terrified child, begging anyone in the front row to help him. Nobody moved a single muscle. Chloe let out a blood-curdling, agonizing scream. She tried to run toward the stage, but her high heels caught on the hem of her glittering silver maternity dress. She collapsed hard onto the carpeted floor, clutching her pregnant stomach and sobbing hysterically. Her perfect, wealthy, high society fantasy had just been completely annihilated. She was not the untouchable elite wife she thought she was. She was the pregnant wife of a disgraced federal criminal who had just lost absolutely everything. My parents, Marcus and Vivian, jumped out of their seats. They did not run to comfort their sobbing golden child on the floor. Instead, they instinctively tried to scurry away from the front row, desperately attempting to blend into the crowd of stunned onlookers and escape the immediate blast radius of the scandal. "Not so fast, Marcus," I called out through the microphone, stopping my father dead in his tracks. The spotlight operator, following my gaze, instantly swung a bright, blinding beam of white light directly onto my parents, pinning them in place. The entire audience of Atlanta's most prominent Black doctors, lawyers, real estate developers, and political leaders turned to stare at them with profound, unadulterated disgust. These were the exact same people Marcus and Vivian had spent decades trying to impress. "You thought you could walk away from this?" I asked, my voice dripping with cold, lethal grace. "You thought you could sacrifice my life on an operating table, throw me to a white fraudster to protect your country club status, and just quietly slip out the back door when it all fell apart?" Vivian raised her hands, shielding her eyes from the harsh spotlight. "Maya, please stop," Vivian begged, her voice shaking with pathetic public humiliation. "Do not do this in front of the community. We will leave Atlanta. We will sell the house in the suburbs and just go away quietly. We promise." I smiled, the kind of smile that sends a chill down the spine. "You cannot sell the house, Mom," I said softly, the microphone picking up every single syllable. "When you and Dad maxed out your credit lines to pay for Chloe's absurdly lavish baby shower and to fund your desperate social climbing, you took out a massive second mortgage. You defaulted on those payments 3 months ago. The bank was quietly preparing to foreclose." Marcus puffed out his chest, trying to summon one last ounce of his fake patriarchal authority. "Then let the bank take it," he snapped, his face sweating profusely under the bright spotlight. "We will declare bankruptcy. We do not need your permission to lose our own home." "You do not understand, Dad," I replied, leaning slightly forward. "The bank did not foreclose. They sold the debt to a private anonymous holding trust that specializes in acquiring distressed real estate. I am the sole beneficiary of that trust. I bought your mortgage. I hold the deed to the property. You do not own a single brick of that sprawling suburban fortress you used to project your fake wealth. I am your landlord. And as of this morning, my legal team has officially served you with a 30-day notice of eviction." Vivian let out a choked, agonizing gasp, wrapping her arms around her own stomach as if she had been physically gutted. Marcus staggered backward, his knees giving out until he bumped into a beautifully decorated dinner table. He knocked over a crystal wine glass, staring up at me with wide, hollow, terrified eyes. I had not just taken their money. I had taken their sanctuary, their status, and the very ground they walked on. The elite Black community of Atlanta, the prestigious fraternity brothers, the sorority sisters, the charity board members, and the old money matriarchs did not offer my parents a single ounce of sympathy. The whispers in the room quickly grew into loud vocal condemnations. The crowd parted, creating a wide, empty circle around Marcus, Vivian, and the sobbing Chloe. The people my parents had worshipped looked at them with absolute pure revulsion. They had heard the whispers of how Marcus and Vivian treated their eldest daughter, but seeing the ultimate betrayal play out in real time was entirely unforgivable. The gala host, an imposing man who sat on the board of the city's most exclusive social organizations, stepped forward. He looked directly at my father with eyes full of cold, professional disdain. "Marcus," the host said firmly, pointing toward the grand double doors at the back of the ballroom, "you and your family are no longer welcome at this event. You are no longer welcome in our organizations. I suggest you gather your pregnant daughter and leave this building immediately before I have security physically remove you." It was the ultimate social execution. Marcus and Vivian. The two people who had cared about nothing but public perception were being openly publicly exiled by the very society they had sacrificed me to join. I stood on the stage and watched the federal agents drag a weeping, handcuffed Preston down the side aisle toward the service elevators. I watched Marcus physically pull Vivian up from the floor. The two of them had to practically carry the hysterically sobbing Chloe, dragging her by her arms as they took the long, humiliating walk of shame down the center aisle. Hundreds of eyes bored into their backs. Nobody offered to help them. Nobody offered a word of comfort. They walked out of this grand civic center completely stripped of their wealth, their dignity, and their fake high society crowns. I pick up the crystal glass from the table beside me and take a slow, refreshing sip of ice-cold water. I lean back against the emerald velvet cushions of my armchair, letting the heavy tension finally melt out of my shoulders. The warm sunlight streams through the massive windows of my living room, bathing the entire space in a brilliant, bright glow. The storm is over. The dust has completely settled. Preston did not get the luxury of a quiet, white-collar plea deal. The federal judge made an absolute example of him. He is currently serving a 10-year sentence in a federal penitentiary, completely cut off from the generational wealth that bred his staggering arrogance. As for Marcus and Vivian, they had exactly 30 days to vacate the sprawling suburban fortress I legally seized from them. They now live in a cramped, run-down apartment complex on the extreme outskirts of the city. They were permanently blacklisted from every single country club alumni association and high society gala in Atlanta. They lost the fake prestige that they valued far more than their own flesh and blood, and they have to wake up every single day knowing they did it to themselves. Chloe filed for divorce the moment Preston's assets were seized by the government, but she had absolutely nothing left to her name. I am not a monster, so I did not leave my unborn nephew to suffer for the sins of his mother. I established a secure, anonymous educational and medical trust fund that will cover the child's basic needs and future tuition. But I drafted the legal stipulations with absolute ruthless precision. Neither Chloe nor my parents can ever access a single dime of that money. The funds go directly to the schools and the pediatricians. They can never use that innocent child as a pawn to fund their lifestyle again. Looking back at that terrifying night in the intensive care unit, I realized something incredibly profound. Family is not defined by shared genetics or a shared last name. True family are not the people who abandon you to attend a pastel baby shower. True family are the people who stand right next to your hospital bed when your heart monitor flatlines. True family is Elijah Sterling treating me like a daughter, and the loyal colleagues who stood by my side as we burned an empire of lies to the ground. My parents always told me that I owed them my life simply because they gave birth to me. They used that heavy obligation to keep me chained to their toxic expectations for 30 years. But when they stood outside my hospital room and actively refused to pay $150,000 to save my life, that lifelong debt was paid in full. The survival invoice is clear. For the first time in my entire life, I am completely free.